Hey, welcome everybody. This is John Palmodetto, Dr. Speed Selling. This is Raging Verbalist number 168. And if this is the first time you're here, excellent. Hit that, like and subscribe and all those things that YouTube loves to see. And we keep building this thing for those of you who are old veterans who have been here before. Thanks for coming back. Appreciate it. All right. So for those who don't know, Raging Verbalist is all about something that hits me that I will be, ranting and raving and going over. And also you can go to the Facebook group, Position to Win Book, classically titled, of course, based upon my book. And you can add in and say, hey, what about this or what about that? And then all of that. So now let's get rolling on this thing. So I have with me, as always, the ever lovely Sandra. Sandra, welcome.
Hello, how are you doing?
Doing well. A little overcast and rainy here, but we are here. So away we go. So what are we talking about today?
We are talking about non-compete agreements. So where do you think this drive to eliminate non-compete agreements comes from?
Well, I think part of it is this giant meddling idea and concept that, what we're going to do is we're going to meddle on things. I'm talking about from a variety of different directions. Let's first talk about what non-compete is all about, or whatever the non is. And the whole point of this is that if you hire somebody, you work with somebody, you're doing something with somebody, that you put together a non-compete, a non-disclosure, a non-disparagement, a non-something. But the whole thing has come from the fact that, there are people who say, hey, this is kind of not to my liking. I want to be able to go do something else. Now, in its extreme, I guess you can point out that there's some issues with it, but you can always fight that if you want to. But where I think it's coming from is the, ever encroaching nanny state that somebody says, oh, I've got this great idea. Let's just eliminate these things. And I think that it is ridiculous. If you are dealing with adults, so many business people act like children, but if they're of age of maturity, if you will, they have to know what they're signing or not signing. And non-compete is just part of life, because there's lots of things that people get insights and information on, which in fact could allow them to go out and do something else. So, I think the big push is coming from the overarching nanny thing and saying, oh, look at this. If we didn't have them, the world would be a better place. We're already suing everybody else. So let's at least have an agreement that tells people right up front. And that's, I just think it's coming from that nanny thing.
All right. And is there anything specifically that has been done?
Well, the president signed an executive order in 2021. What the president of the United States has to do with commerce and business and whether or not people can freely engage in commerce. Now, if you go work for somebody and you sign a non-compete, you should actually abide by that non-compete. Now, I can tell you that there's lots of people who figure out a way around it. There's lots of things that happen. But, the president in 2021 signed it. I don't think it's constitutional. I don't think it's correct, because, again, we're talking about, and this is maybe where, we touch a little bit on politics as it hits business, but it just makes business harder to do. How do you trust anybody that you go and hire or work with if you know that they can be hired to go steal your business? It's tough enough being in business without having people, coming in and just, ransacking. And I'm not talking about physically, but I'm talking about intellectually ransacking your business and taking information and going in a different direction.
And have you ever signed a non-compete agreement?
The answer is yes. And I've worked in niches where I've been in the same niche for a number of years, and I've worked with all of the various companies, or mutts, if you will, in those marketplaces. And one of the biggest things, of course, is that people will always point out that this would, if you sign these things and they're upheld in the court system, that you may be out there, on at the exit with a squeegee and a bucket of water and cleaning windshields because you got blocked out. So this is really not an issue for so many people, but for whatever reason, now, and it's all about advantage. Let's just put it this way. I received great insight and information from working for these companies. Now, I don't expect that, and they didn't expect that they're going to be able to get this long tail and work off of this. On the other side, when I left a company that I was working for in a niche and went to work for another company, we would call them a competitor in the same niche. One of the biggest fears, one of the biggest concerns was I was going to steal the customer base. I was going to go out there and do that. And if you're the number one salesperson, there's always those concerns. There's always those types of things. So I was very cautious. I was very aware of it. I understood what I was signing. I understood what I was doing walking in the door, and all of those things. And all I can tell you is that I never had a non-compete, knock on wood, that really hurt me. Now, I do this with consulting clients and turnaround clients where they will say, listen, we don't want you, you're going to be the turnaround guy. If you turn this thing around, last thing we want to do is have you steal and swipe the whole business away from you. And I have to say that most of the time when I see somebody's business, I have no interest in taking it because I have seen too much. You can't unsee it. You can't undo it. So yeah, I have signed many in my life.
All right. And what do you think the implications are of this trend?
Well, lack of trust. I mean, if you lose trust, if you worry that people are going to take your stuff and not do right by you, and they're going to go walk away and literally, swipe your business, then I think that what that does is it creates a really different atmosphere. Now, you can always point out something that's very aberrant and say, well, here was somebody who was driven out of an industry or what have you. But I can tell you that if the trend continues, what will happen is that you're going to compartmentalize the information. I do that a lot with clients when I go in and put things in place, is doing compartmentalization. See, at one point in time, people didn't really know all that was going on. Then we kind of got to the, kindergarten, everything I needed to know about business I learned in kindergarten, which, by the way, those books are like, I'll just say nonsense. Now, it's great to get along with people, it's all that, but, you have to deal with adults who are out there for their own and best good, and that they are, in fact, selfish. They want to have advantage. They want to go do things, and away you go. So I think that if this trend continues, that means you bring people in, you compartmentalize everything. You don't have a whole big giant sit down and have everybody explain everything. Now, to me, this is the opposite of a trend that was going on, which is that you tell everybody everything, and therefore they have a sense that they're not just a cog, but they're part of a bigger machine and methodology to accomplish an end goal. We'll see where that shakes out. I think that in some ways it could have very negative implications, and business will adapt to this, by the way. People will adapt to it, and in fact, will become much more siloed, in which you don't show information to certain parts of the organization, other parts, and then you're going to have to deal with the friction that causes and the costs that take place from that. Now, having said all of those things, the non-compete is its own problem, but the real key is to make sure that you have the right positioning in your business. And to have the right positioning in your business, well, I have a solution for that. And that solution for that is this book. Most businesses fail in the first 5 minutes. It just takes them 3 to 5 years to realize it, position to win. Most businesses do not position themselves, do not reinforce their position, do not work on their position. Positioning isn't something that you say, oh, here's my positioning, we'll put it on a plastic laminated card and we're done. It's something that you have to actually do every single day. Every transaction, you're either reinforcing a position that you are saying that you own, or you're deterring, you're going away from it, you're moving in the wrong direction. So if you want to learn how to go do that, go out there and check this out, because of course people are, the reason why they want to sign non-compete and all of those kinds of agreements is that they want to protect what is theirs. Well, first off, the most important thing you can have is a position, and this is how you can do it. You can go get a physical copy at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, and wherever bookstores are sold, and you can request it by title, or you can go to positiontowinbook.com, positiontowinbook.com, And if you go there and you say, hey, John, could you sign it for me? We will do that and ship it out to you. Also, you can get it digitally in all kinds of cool formats. You can get it in Amazon Kindle, Barnes & Noble Nook, and Apple iBooks. Also, you can read my other book, which is Remote Work for a Better World. And if you are doing anything remote, you will learn things available exclusively on the Amazon Kindle store. And then, of course, the most important thing is we now have merch. So we have our first piece of merch, which is the Raging Verbalist mug. Ooh, that's good. I can just tell you that every cup of coffee will taste better with the Raging Verbalist, because you'll get a little bit of that rage and get out there and do what you need to do. Okay, Sandra, what is the next question?
All right. Have you ever had anyone exploit an idea of yours?
Well, just so happens I did. So early on in my career, connected with a person who would become my lifetime best friend, and he and I concocted over several meals an idea for building this business inside of his father's business, if you will. If we use fancy terms today, we would call it that we would use his father's business as an incubator and give him a little piece of it, and that we would grow this business and we'd lay it out. And of course, this is, we were, writing on paper and doing all this great stuff, all these great ideas. And, we ended up telling his sister and brother-in-law about the idea, and they promptly not only stole the idea, and then took it over and then, booted us out the door and said, hey, by the way, here's a coupon for, a grand slam at Denny's, because we just slammed you really hard. And they took that and they grew it into quite a sizable business, became very successful, ended up outgrowing their own abilities, and they ended up losing the business eventually. But they had like a 4-year run where they did some really massive things, and they did a lot of the things, not all of them, but they did a lot of the things that we had talked about. Now, to this day, if you bring it up or you point it out to any of them, I mean, sadly, one of them has passed away, but they will deny that, well, this was kind of an idea that just kind of happened anyway, and it was so obvious. It wasn't obvious when I was concocting that idea, sitting there with my best friend at dinner and saying, what we really can do is we could do X, Y, and Z, and here's how we can leverage this. I had none of the languaging skills I have today. I had very little of the negotiating capability. And more importantly, I didn't understand that you have to protect your intellectual property up front, because if you don't, then you know what? You're gonna get people doing crazy stuff. It's one of the reasons why if I'm ever sitting somewhere, if you're ever sitting across from me and I draw out something from you, I will always put a copyright at the bottom and take a picture of it. Thank goodness for smartphones, because that way if somebody takes the stuff and uses it, then I can go, wait a second, that really is my material because I actually did it. But yeah, that was really heartbreaking. And I was really not happy about that, because it probably would have changed my life in a significant way if we had in fact done that gig and done that business. But it was, it's still there, still painful all these years later.
That sounds really bad. Is there another example?
Well, another example is that I get into the whole info business, and long before there were podcasts, I was interviewing individual achievers, a whole group of people like Dan Kennedy and others. And I ended up interviewing this author, and I, tracked him down in Spain, and which is where one of his houses was. And we had this really great conversation, to this really good interview. And I described exactly how I viewed what his work was, because he has very specific work. So I'm tap dancing around it a little bit, because he's still out there, he's successful. Don't want to, hey, it's water under the bridge, or it's theft. It's theft in the daytime, because that's the other thing is that if you don't have any kind of attribution or anybody recognizing this, people just will just steal this thing. I mean, non-compete is really designed to keep the honest people honest. Anyway, back to my horror story. So we're having this interview, and I described to him my analogy of what he does. I summarize it in a very succinct way. Well, okay, that was a good interview. I liked the interview. I sold the interview to people, and whenever I do an interview with anybody, if you're out there and want me to do an interview, I don't do it quite the same way I used to do it, but what I would do is I would do an interview. I would hand them a master. I would have a master. I would always say, listen, if you want to give it away to somebody, that's fine, but I don't want you to publicly broadcast it. I don't want, and was I for seeing YouTube and people tossing up tons of very expensive material for free? Not quite, but I just knew that people could get crazy. Anyway, so life goes on. I'm sitting in my timeshare in Squaw Valley, Olympic Village, really cool place, by the way, if you ever want to go to kind of a unique, property. And we go into the city of Truckee, and at Truckee, they have this bookstore. And this bookstore, because I always like to I like to go in and buy books at small bookstores and go in and do things like that and support them. So I'm there and I see this author's name, and it's this book. And I pull the book out and I just happen to be thumbing through it. And like the second or third stop that I did in the book, because I have a very specific way that I go and look at books, here is this guy taking my story, my analogy, my way of doing it, and describes, hey, this is one of the best ways to describe this. And what I don't see is any attribution. I don't see, hey, John Paul Mendoza, Dr. Speed Selling, said this to me, and obviously he wrote it down because he said it verbatim, pretty damn close. Okay, so now we fast forward. I'm actually an MC at an event that he's in, and I'm sitting there and we're talking, and I said, well, it's kind of interesting that you took this story. He goes, oh, yeah, that's a great way to describe it. I said, right, it's mine. He's like, well, what are you talking about? No, I wrote it. I said, no, you didn't write it. And I knew this was going to happen, so I actually had a copy of the interview. And in the interview, he says, geez, I've never heard of it that way. That's really smart and clever. Right. That was, and now, did it cost me anything? Yeah, it did, because my name should be in his book, because he should give attribution. We give attribution when we say things. If I say that this is a quote from, Peter Drucker, I say it's Peter Drucker. If it, but again, left it out. So yeah, that was another one of those. So yeah, it has changed when I go out and do any of these presentations, any of this stuff, is that I really want to make sure that people at least give me attribution, for heaven's sakes. I mean, send me the cash. I mean, that would even be better.
All right. And so how do you protect yourself?
Well, we're still doing agreements, in spite of what may happen, and how the Federal Trade Commission is going to end up ruling on this thing going forward. I mean, I hope somebody has the courage and guts and money to take this thing through the court system, because I think that this is ridiculous. Having government set what individuals can do, there is a whole big march to remove these kinds of things. Hey, there's a privacy consent thing, but now no, in a commerce, in a business sense, well, those relationships are just as important as other relationships, and who you swap spit with or whatever that is. Well, hey, this is who you swap ideas and concepts and things with. I mean, this is important. So I still do non-compete, non-disclosure, non-disparagement. I do all of those things, and we'll see where it ends up. Maybe it all gets thrown out eventually, but I think that is a bad trend. And I think anybody who says, no, it's a good idea, if you think it's a good idea, go to our Facebook group, put in contact information, because I would like to take all of your intellectual property and repurpose it without any attribution, remuneration, or even saying that you had anything to do with it. How naive could people be, or can they be?
And how do you have an environment where people can work together?
Well, I think if this really becomes the law of the land, if this really becomes what it's supposed to be, then, what you're going to do is you're not going to sit down with anybody without having, and the lawyers are going to figure out something, some kind of Band-Aid thing. They'll, get 3 lawyers together, you got 22 different ways to sue people. But what you're going to end up with is whenever you're going to meet somebody, you're going to hand them a sheet of paper and pre-warn them about this stuff. And more importantly, you're going to compartmentalize your business so people don't know what's going on in other parts of the business. I think that's probably going to happen. It would be a negative trend. I think it's going to reduce productivity and more importantly, drive people to want to, in fact, find ways to get things done where you don't have to deal with people, humans, and will probably drive us more towards adopting more AI. So that way we have, but of course, then you got to worry about the AI, the bots stealing your idea and going and running with it.
And how, as a business or entrepreneur, do you protect your intellectual property?
Well, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not giving any legal advice. I'm going to tell people right now that if you want to get something, you should seek legal advice. But what I'm going to say is that everything that you can possibly do, you should spend some time learning about intellectual property law, because that's what this is. This is intellectual property. If you spent years putting something together, the last thing you want to do is have somebody walk in and say, "Oh, I can take that." So you're going to want to look at copyright laws, trademarks, service marks, patents. You want to look at all of those things, and you want to try to protect all your stuff as much as possible. Also, you want to make sure that and this is what I've been doing for quite some time. Now, this could get you in trouble if you say something bad or you do something that's incriminating. So I'm going to give you that warning, but you should record things. If you're going to shit can somebody, that's a nice way of saying fire them, you probably should record that exit interview. If you're going to go, now, if I'm exiting, I don't want to do the exit interview, and you're right not to do it. But the point of it is that you should record things where you can, where it's legal, learn how about that. The more importantly, documentation is going to be critical. Hey, if I had just talked to this author who is somewhat famous and rather rich about this, and I had not recorded it, would not have that information, he would have every right to say, well, as he purportedly did, that this is all just in the wind. It wasn't in the wind. It was my breath coming out of my mouth telling him these things. So my statement to everybody, as a non-lawyer, go get a lawyer. Yeah, but you got to be careful which kind of lawyer you get. So I'm worried about that. But let's say we take care of that prerequisite. Documentation, making sure you put your copyright on things, making sure that you notify people, date everything. By the way, dating is like, it's amazing how many times I will find a piece of paper that nobody wrote the date on. This was an important meeting. They didn't write the date on it, write who's there. All of this information is important because all of this drives us to one thing: putting people on notice to don't steal my stuff. And that's really the situation, is you want to make sure that people have a sense of obligation, and it's all about keeping the honest people honest and doing that. And if you do that, then what I will have done, maybe to a little extent, is help this process along. I have had people who would not sign a non-disclosure agreement and they didn't get the information. And I'm perfectly fine with that. I'm perfectly okay with that. But whatever you're going to do, make sure that at least you have made every effort. It's all about the optics of it. I did everything I could possibly do to make the effort to put people on notice and therefore protect what is mine. And if you do that, then you will be in better shape, not perfect shape, but better shape than you would have otherwise. So for myself, John Paul Mendoza, Dr. Speed Selling, and of course, our ever lovely Sandra, this has been the Raging Verbalist number 168. It's a very competitive world, and you want to make sure that you're protected as much as you can. Hopefully that we will see this trend stop, because the last thing we need to do is have the nannies telling us, people who are trying to do business with each other, what we can and we cannot do in a way that makes it impossible to communicate, share ideas, and more importantly, to build a bigger, better world. And with that, thanks everybody. We'll see you next week.